Welcome, everybody. My name is Jill Jonathan, and I'm with Red Wine and Blue. And Joe, as in JoJo from Jers, is here too. And then Ray, she is one of our phenomenal organizers. So I'll introduce her in just a few minutes. Um, if you don't know about Red Wine and Blue, we're a community of women who use digital media and friend-to-friend organizing to change the world one suburb at a time. And so we love having conversations, and we have to talk about things. You know what I mean? We can't stick our heads in the sand. We can't pretend all these wild things aren't happening. We have to talk about them. And so today is February 28th, and it's the last day of February. And as we all know, February is Black History Month. But, let's be honest, we got to talk about Black history throughout the year. We need more than just a month. We need to continue to talk about it. And so that's why we pulled in Ray. Not only is she a brilliant organizer, but she's also a history major and just a wealth of knowledge. So Ray, Joe, thank you for joining me. So glad you're here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And there's Joe. Hey, Joe.
Hi.
All right, so let's get started. So Ray, you told us, let's go ahead and talk about the background of Black History Month and start with Dr. Carter G. Woodson and how we even got here. So if you want to just go ahead and let us know, because I don't even know. So I am here to learn.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure and honor being Deputy Organizing Officer here at Red Wine and Blue. And Black History Month is 365, 24/7 for us. Black history is American history and just history in general. Black folks from across the diaspora have contributed to inventions, political ideas, movements. You have it. We've been involved in all of it since the beginning of time. And we wouldn't be able to talk about Black History Month without talking about the famed historian, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who is oftentimes called the founder of Black history. But beyond that, he was a historian who was actually the second Black person after Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois to graduate from Harvard with a degree. Because he had such a love for Black history, Black people, and our contributions, he started organizing and saying, hey, we really need to institutionalize this and formalize how we celebrate the contributions of Black folks, not only from America, but across the diaspora. So back in the early 1900s, he started organizing, many of us, in basements and in churches. He had a famed meeting at the Wabash YWCA back in 1915 in Bronzeville, which is a really amazing community in Chicago, Illinois. And he started talking to folks, and people were like, well, we should do this. And so he went on to present this idea to some of the members of his fraternity, Omega Psi Phi, which is a Black Greek letter organization founded in 1911. He just started talking to his friends, family members, and colleagues about the need for it. And so he said, let's start Negro History Week to coincide with the birthday of Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln. So essentially, Negro History Week is where Black History Month started. Of course, over several decades and having very successful Negro History Weeks. In 1976, President Ford officially made February Black History Month, and every president since 1976 has recognized February as Black History Month. I'd also say I'd be remiss without mentioning Ida B. Wells, who did a lot of work during Reconstruction around racism and lynching, not only in the South, but all over the United States, and really exposing folks to the horror of racism, white supremacy, and also to the fact that as a famed journalist as she was really making sure she made the historical record plain and clear by establishing various publications, writing a book called The Red Record. And so essentially, in Reconstruction and the beginning of the 20th century, there were so many historical figures, Black and otherwise, who were really wanting to say, you know what, we need folks to know the reality of Black folks' experiences. It is not just rooted in slavery. It is so much more expansive, intergenerational, and includes everyone.
I love that. Thank you so much for giving that introduction. And I didn't know that it started in, would you say 1976?
Yes.
I didn't even know that. That's so interesting. I'm like, and why didn't I know that? Right. And I think that's where Joe and I have a lot of
Yeah.
questions. We're like,
Yeah.
why didn't we know these things?
Right. Here it is, 2023. And there's so many questions about the things that we didn't know, the things that we weren't taught. And then we're also witnessing sort of a reversal. It seems like in that conversation that we're being pulled backwards as opposed to progressed forwards.
Yes, absolutely. And, I know that folks have been seeing what's been happening in Florida, and I am a Florida resident and voter and parent here, and what is happening with African American studies, not only at the K through 12 level, but even at the collegiate level, with repressing topics that are central to understanding our history and what's ahead for us to address in the future, whether it's through economic policy or even related to healthcare. And so we're seeing an attack on historically accurate information. Many of the things that are included in some of the curriculum that would have been in the African American studies curriculum is all based in historical fact that's been recorded through the census, through publications, through academic journals, and the fact that it's being whitewashed or even erased is such a travesty. And so it's not just happening in Florida. Just as early as I think earlier this week, there was legislation presented in North Carolina for the same thing to be done. So what's happening in Florida can happen everywhere. In actually 19 states, there are attempts to really limit what can be known about not only Black studies, but queer studies, women studies. It's happening at all the levels. And so we have to make sure that we are cognizant of this and take action in any way we can, whether that's at the local, state, or federal level.
It's just wild that like we're only learning such a small part of it, and they're even trying to take that away. And I just want to quote a tweet that really meant something to me. And it was from Nicole Hannah-Jones, who's the creator of the 1619 Project, which is phenomenal. And there's a Hulu series on it. I highly, highly recommend people watching that. But she said that someone asked me why Black history specifically is being targeted. And I said it's because our history has always been political by definition. Our very presence of these lands is the greatest rebuke to the narrative of American exceptionalism. We give lie to the lie. Black history is the most inconvenient to American mythology. In a country founded on ideals of liberty, we were enslaved. The greatest democracy in the world violently suppressed democracy amongst its Black citizens for 100 years after the end of slavery. These truths are hard. It's easier to marginalize, minimize, or suppress these truths than deal honestly with them and their modern day consequences. That's why we know these efforts in Florida and elsewhere, 19 states, have never been about accurate history, but rather the suppression of it. So, Ray, I'm just curious of your thoughts. I feel like she just laid it out there. She just told the truth.
Yeah, she unapologetically tells the truth all the time. And I'm a big fan of Professor Hannah-Jones' work. And she's telling the truth. I mean, really and truly, our lives, all of our lives, Black or otherwise, are all political. All politics is local. And so the attempt to suppress the truth is a part of an extremist agenda to keep people uneducated about the realities of their own privilege or own existence. And so there are modern day consequences for this. Folks need to understand why their reality is shaped why it is, why certain laws are going into place, why certain organizations are even popping up to support Black history or not. And so, unfortunately, it's been a violent struggle to impress upon folks the importance that Black history is more than just Black folks' history, it's everyone's history. We're all in this together. And I think that to minimize our contributions is to say that, well, you know what? Slavery didn't happen. In some places, even in Texas, they're trying to take out the word slavery from books and saying indentured servitude. It was not indentured servitude. We would have never had the 13th Amendment if it was indentured servitude. And so I totally agree with Dr. Hannah-Jones. And I think that having spaces like this to talk intergenerationally across movements is needed now more than ever.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's this idea that they're pushing that from the right that suddenly, right, school curriculum is trying to make white people ashamed of their whiteness by simply recounting the truth of our past and our history, that somehow there's an agenda that to make white children feel ashamed that their ancestors were able to commit atrocities, when that to deny that truth means that there's obviously no path forward or growth from it. But that the umbrella, right, that they're putting all of this under is that it's parents' rights and protecting the children and making sure that we're not indoctrinating them by making them resent their own, their own cultural background or the color of their skin. And that those are all like boogeymen, right? They're basically weapons that they're using to stoke these irrational and manufactured fears to suppress the truth.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. And it's fear mongering. And to some people, I've heard some people throw this word around, and I don't want to throw it around lightly, but fascism.
Yeah.
We've seen in other movements, we saw the Third Reich use propaganda to disseminate whole troves of people. And in my way, I think, it is fascist activity. It is propaganda that telling the truth would somehow make people ashamed of themselves. But what can be done, though, is that when folks know the truth, they can act in the truth, and they can act more equitably, and they can align themselves with folks in movements to make sure that we make our society better now and for future generations. And so I wholeheartedly agree, JoJo, that this is a concentrated effort. It's no mistake that this is happening in legislatures and in local school board meetings across the United States. It is a coordinated effort to say, oh, no, we don't want to look back at the past. But you can't look back at the past when we're fully in a present and future that is unfortunately steeped in violence and in white supremacy. We didn't create it, but we can make it better, no matter where we were in history or our ancestors were in history.
Yeah, right. And why wouldn't we want to make it better? And the thing is, I'm a woman in my early 40s. My husband, I'm like, it's early 40s. Okay. And, I didn't even learn about some of these things until my 30s when I was doing some education on my own. And I just was like, why didn't I know this? I want to know more. How did I not know this? And for example, like, this is super embarrassing, but I didn't know much about Reconstruction. And as I learned more about it, I'm like, this is wild. Like, after the Civil War, we had Reconstruction where it seemed like things were moving in the right direction. And then they just took a terrible turn. So I would love to hear from you, Ray, just a little bit about Reconstruction and why we all need to know about this.
Well, finally, after Reconstruction, folks were free. Black folks were effectively free with the 13th Amendment, although, as you all know, with Juneteenth, many folks in Texas didn't find out they were free until 1865. And so during that time, Black folks did have access to more opportunity for economic success, to build businesses, to buy land, to get educated at public and private institutions. And unfortunately, folks didn't like that. And so a number of things, particularly in the South, started happening where mobs and white folks began killing Black folks because of this advancement and the ability to have more parity in society, particularly in America. And so with that, in some of the work that Ida B. Wells did, she talks very specifically about how many business owners and many people owning land for the first time were targeted and lynched, effectively just killed, just because they were existing and bettering themselves and creating more opportunities for their community. I even think about the Tulsa Massacre. And I know JoJo and I were talking about that a little bit earlier, is that the Greenwood community, which was such a thriving metropolis, or it was what many people called Black Wall Street, was decimated. Over 10,000 people were displaced as a result of that white mob racist effort to disseminate whole communities of people, just because they were building businesses and were thriving in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I believe that was in 1921. And so I mean, it's been going on. 1921 was over 100 years ago, and we're still seeing some of those same things happen. I've seen in movies like Rosewood, a whole community in Florida had many of that happen. We've seen sundown towns where folks can't be in black after sundown. Literally, that still happens today in many states. And so I would say Reconstruction, as horrible as it has been, it did show that activists and journalists like Ida B. Wells could bring light to these horrors and educate folks on what it is, and also create a historical record so that we can't forget.
Mm-hmm.
I know we did touch on it earlier, and you just talked about Tulsa, and something that really strikes me and struck me as well a few years back. I am in my late 40s. I'm 48 years old, and I was in my early 40s before I ever heard those words. I never, and I fault myself, of course, because it seems like a little, being a little more curious about the state of history would have probably been an honest that I could have taken on. But I'm also scratching my head and wondering, I grew up in New Jersey. I was educated in New Jersey. Our schools are generally considered pretty strong. How is it possible that was not taught to me? And I know it's not being taught to my kids.
Well, it's systematic and intentional exclusion, quite frankly. I, as someone who grew up primarily in the South, and I'm a Black woman, and so I don't have the privilege of taking off my identities. And so from very early in my life, my parents were always instilling in me and my grandparents to be curious about my identity, but also the identities of others. And so whether it was going to someone's vacation Bible school or going to someone's Shabbat, my parents instilled in me the importance of being curious, also about my own identity, but others as well. And so I think that we as parents, we're all parents here, we have to instill in our children curiosity. And I think that no matter where you are in your journey, you're educating yourself now and you're educating others, and you're making the same effort to educate your children so that when they're more mature, I won't say how old we are. When we're more mature, we'll have a better world, and they'll have a better world now. And so having conversations like this, no matter the age, is extremely important. And that's what happens in schools. We want to raise emotionally intelligent, inclusive, curious children. And it starts with us as parents. It starts as us having community like Red, Wine, and Blue. It starts with fighting back against these extremist policies. So no matter where we are in our journey learning about history, we have to start somewhere. And despite me being a historian, I'll never know all the things about Black history or American history, but I push myself each day to learn not only about my history, but the history of other communities as well, because I want to be not only an ally or an accomplice, but also a co-conspirator for all of us. We all live intersectional lives. I don't have a single one issue life just because I'm Black or just because I'm a woman, but there are so many other intersections where we can learn and grow and build with one another. And so I would say we're on the right path, despite when we learned about the Tulsa massacre. Now we're spreading that information today to make sure that it's not repressed, and that we share as much as we can, since we're endeavoring to be curious and thoughtful human beings.
I love that. And I think that's what I try to teach my kids too, is be curious. And you know what? You meet people where you are, and you are where you are. So just accept that, and just, if you're, stay curious and continue to grow. And I just want to, one thing, like, my daughter loves to read. My son, not as much, but she has, and I cannot remember this author, but he wrote New Kid, and there's a sequel to it, and it's a graphic novel, and I think it's on banned book lists, which is just ridiculous. But it is a graphic novel about a young Black boy who goes to like a private school, and he just experiences some new things. And so I thought my daughter would be interested in it. I gave it to her. She read it, and I said, "Did you like it?" And she said, "I do, but I have so many questions." And so she asked me a lot of questions, and I'm like, I don't know how to answer all these, but I'll try. And you know what? Why don't we read it together now? And so we read it together, and I included my son. And so that's what it's like, staying curious. Like, you're learning alongside your kid. And I just think we're always learning. And I do want to kind of like pivot to something that is always taught in school, which is about Martin Luther King, which of course we love Martin Luther King, but Ray, I'm curious of, I call it watering down. I don't know if you have another phrase for it, but I think people like to just focus on like one aspect of Martin Luther King and like maybe just take one quote and try to go with that. But no, he was fighting for rights. So I'm just curious on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, he was such a dynamic historical figure and man in general. And when he was effectively assassinated at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, he was fighting for sanitation workers. He was fighting on behalf of economic justice and labor. And so he wasn't just fighting for civil rights, but he was fighting for human rights, rights on the job. And so I think that folks oftentimes try to put him in a silo. He was so nonviolent, and he was a pastor, and all those things are true, but he was tied into other movements as well. And so his legacy not only helps folks with civil rights, but across movements. And he was allied with a lot of even controversial figures. I think that he and Malcolm X may have only met each other once or twice even. And there's limited documentation about their meeting, but they were both in the struggle, fighting for rights in different ways. But nonetheless, I think that his legacy of making sure that all of our children, not just Black children, but all of our children can have better lives is resounds across movements. And that's why I know that we do the work that we do, because we want the world to be a better place for children and everyone who comes after us.
Right. That's so important, because while something may not impact every one of our children in the same way, when one child is treated differently or their history isn't acknowledged in a classroom setting, it affects all the children in that environment, in that room. And that's something that we often lose sight of. And that's something that's really important to Red Wine and Blues, to make sure that everybody understands that we are really looking out for everyone's kids. You know, we're moms. And so that's just how we are. We want to protect every child. And so the more inclusive an environment in a classroom, the better it is for every student. And I just, on the subject of classrooms, I just wanted to sort of semi-pivot, because there's this question I have about something that is, you know, you say these three letters, CRT, ooh, and everybody goes, oh, and Ron DeSantis has this anti-woke BS nonsense that everything is under this anti-woke umbrella. And you'll see the same in Texas and lots of other states. So let's just dispel a little bit, if you don't mind. What is CRT, and is it being taught to kindergartners?
No, CRT or critical race theory is a class that is actually, I believe it's an elective in law school. Law school is a graduate school for folks who want to be legal practitioners. And no, it's not. If you'll look at the work of Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, she talks about CRT and how she coined the term intersectionality in 1989, and how these things are they're very complicated and very nuanced, but children are not learning that. They're learning age appropriate information for their age. I would definitely not talk to a kindergarten class about lynching. I would say, hey, your friend has differences. We have different shades. I mean, there's a way in which to talk to kids about race that's age appropriate in the school setting. And so I think that this CRT, because it is a big phrase and it's heavy and it's so nuanced that people think that that's what this is. And it totally isn't. I mean, identity politics is not going anywhere, but to say that CRT, a legal class, is being taught to kindergartners is just preposterous. And so I've often wondered, I'm like, CRT, that's like, no one and no lay person is going to take that. I don't even think there's civics classes that you can take at any organization about CRT. Is very specific for legal practitioners who want to understand the nuances of how systemic oppression and racism and white supremacy impacts the American legal system, which is a very real topic. And impacts our day to day, but it's definitely not being taught to kindergartners or anybody K through 12, or even people in undergrad. So thanks for bringing that up. And Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, actually, I had pulled a quote from her a little earlier about CRT, and I'm trying to find it in my notes here. Somehow I must have clicked off of it, but I'd like to say that following her, you'll find out a whole bunch about what CRT is and isn't. And she's established the African American Policy Forum that does an amazing job of educating folks at all levels about what CRT is or isn't, and issues specifically impacting Black communities, not only in America, but across the diaspora.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because they use this sort of nebulous word, CRT. What they're doing, and Jill and I had a conversation with author Frederick Joseph recently about his book, and his book is banned all over the place, but he was particularly talking about a district in Texas because Governor Abbott says it violates their anti-CRT curriculum in schools. And really what the book is a recounting of his life growing up as a young Black man. And he's like, how can you say that's CRT? I'm recounting what happened to me in my stories. But that's what how they're casting this whole argument to take this content out of schools, is by saying it violates this non-CRT, anti-CRT curriculum, when that's not even actually being taught at all. And these things, if it was, they wouldn't fall under it. So it's really just kind of this Trojan horse for banning books that have anything to do with living a Black existence in America or anywhere in the world for that matter.
And I would say to that as well, just even policies being in place like that feels like a violation of folks' First Amendment rights. And just as recent as last week, an organization founded by moms in California called Save Our Six just filed a complaint against Governor DeSantis in Florida about how this is a violation of folks' Title VI rights, how it's a violation of that particular part of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And so it's like they're saying, oh, we can't bring up those topics that talk about someone's lived experience, but in suppressing that, you're suppressing their right to free speech. And so the math isn't mathing on that. And so even to go back to your point about banned books, I live in Duval County, which is effectively known as Jacksonville, Florida, where the Timucua people were before it was called Jacksonville. And there are over 176 banned books, K through 12. That seems so unconscionable. Just the mention of being Black or being in a household where you have gender non-conforming parents, or just saying, oh, I love myself and my skin, can be banned. I have a 2.5-year-old daughter, and a third of her book collection, unbeknownst to me, is banned. I was like, oh, I didn't even know we were reading banned books. And there's no mention of CRT, lynchings, none of the horrors that have happened in history that are clearly documented are in any of those books. Many of them talk about having neighbors of different races and abilities, and none of it has anything to do with suppressing any group or being racist or anything. And she's 2.5 years old, and a third of her book collection's banned, but it's okay because we'll keep our little banned book library over here. And I would encourage folks to read banned books, because as sad as it is, they're going to continue to be banned, and we have to continue to fight back. And I know a number of our allied partners and even us as an organization, we have a banned book club, and we have to continue to read these texts and lift up the narratives and lived experiences of these authors and communities that aren't just Black. They're all of us. I mean, we're all on target. If we're not a white cisgender older man, then we all got to watch out.
Yeah, that's right. And the thing that I think about a lot too, because I have an 8th grader and a 5th grader in the public school system, it's a great school district, but we've got some extremist board members and some crazy stuff happening, like I know just about everybody does across the country. And I know, like, for me, I'm a curious person. We talked about that. I'm in this work. I'm going to make sure my kids are getting access to these types of things and these books. So like on a small level, I feel like I'm going to do the work to make sure that they're getting educated in this way. But what I really worry about is other kids, especially white kids, who are not going to be exposed to this kind of stuff because their parents aren't paying attention. They're whatever reason, I don't know. But I know that public education is where a lot of kids are learning things that they wouldn't learn otherwise, or being exposed to new ideas. So I'm just curious, I know I think white kids need to understand and not be centered in every discussion and everything that they're learning. And this is what really terrifies me, because if we are constantly centering this majority or this group of people, then what's happening to marginalized people, but also like what's happening to people who are of privilege if they don't even understand that they do have privilege and why they have privilege. Like they didn't earn it, it just happened. So I don't know, just curious from both of you, thoughts on that.
Yeah, Ray, go ahead. You're up.
I would say, well, I would say yes, we need to decenter the experiences of white folks because they have been or are oftentimes the victors
Mhm.
of a lot of these things. And so oftentimes, even when you think about war, it's those that win the war that write about the war.
Yeah.
And so we have to really be intentional about making sure we decenter the majority, that folks like ourselves continue to spread the word among our neighbors who may be a little bit on the fence about this, like, hey, I don't know. I think that's why it's so important having spaces where civics is not taught except for like a few semesters, maybe in middle school or high school if you really want to, or government when you're in college if you're just really invested in that, or political science. And so I think that we need to um, reimagine civics for folks too, and let them know that these issues are interconnected, and that in piquing our curiosity, we need to make sure that we let folks know that it takes so many of us to make the world go round. And I think that, I mean, I don't have the exact right answer to say like, oh, this would be the magic sauce to make sure that folks care about other folks' experiences. But I think that we are moving along the way. We are working in community to lift up the experiences of under-resourced and underprivileged communities, whether they be minorities or not. And so I think it starts with us and spreading the word and being unashamed to say, hey, I don't know, learn with me, or
Mhm.
ask your girlfriends for a book club. Like, no, maybe we're not going to read a banned book, but maybe we need to read one on Black women's contributions to the feminist movement or something else. I think there's a way to do it that's quote unquote not threatening, but opens folks' eyes up into making sure that they understand that their experiences are just theirs, and that we live life with people of multiple experiences and identities. And so, Jojo, I would love to hear from you about
Mhm.
how would you feel about that, and how have you wrestled with your own white privilege?
So that's a lot to unpack, but a few years ago, a family member said to me, a cis heterosexual, very privileged white man said to me that he represented the most maligned group demographic in America. That what we had seen over the course of his lifetime was a shift where being white and being privileged and working hard and earning a good living and having a nice house made you a target. And I thought to myself, and I said this to him at the time, I thought to myself, I can't believe you actually just said that out loud, first of all. And then I thought to myself, how dare you? And I remember, and there's this story that's crazy, but like we were driving through one of the southern states. I was probably maybe North Carolina a long time ago. We were taking the kids to Disney, and it was pretty late. It was, a road trip. And there was a car on the road ahead of us, and it had a taillight out. And I thought to myself in the moment, my God, like if I wouldn't be scared as a white woman driving through this town with a taillight out at 11:30 at night. But my reality as a white woman versus someone who may be of color driving that same car through that same town is a totally different experience. And that there's nothing that person could ever do to change that experience for themselves. You know what I mean? It's not like a uniform you can just take off or slip out of. That's their permanent reality. And it made me so mad because I both felt like not ashamed necessarily because there's nothing I can do about how I was born, but like angry that there's this disparity. And then when this person in my family said this to me, I was instantly brought back to that feeling. And I was like, how dare you? If you were driving down a country road late at night and you had a taillight out and you got pulled over by a police officer, you wouldn't once worry that you weren't going to survive that incident. But someone who's Black probably does. And I get very emotional because it was like, how dare you see things this way? Because it's so backwards. And what I was going to ask you sort of tangentially about this is why it feels like the natural progression of the country, I hope, is moving towards more inclusivity, progressing towards more equality. Naturally, our makeup is naturally evolving just through the nature of time and history. And so it feels like we're moving down this path ever so slowly and not fast enough, obviously, but change is hard and it takes a long time and it takes work. But why, as that's happening, and I guess it answers itself, is there this sudden seeming pull backwards to regress? There's this movement this way, and then there's this select group of people who want to pull all of that backwards. Does it feel like there's a resurgence in that? Is it to you, or does it seem like this is just how things have always been and people are just paying more attention?
I definitely think that there's regression going on for sure. And unfortunately, I mean, I hate to use this notion, but history oftentimes repeats itself. Once you get a little bit more progress, 2 steps forward, sometimes it's 3 steps back. And that's been a constant cadence in history in general, in my opinion. And so what I would say is that fear of the unknown is what has folks acting like this. They don't know what it's like not to be centered. They don't know what it's like to have their privilege checked. They don't know what it's like not to just be given everything and to be the dominant narrative. Whether we look at beauty, whether we look at the economy, white folks are centered, and decentering those narratives has them afraid. They're like, what is on the other side? Fear is a real emotion. All of us fear, but fear of wanting to be more equitable, fear of wanting to be more respectful, fear of wanting to be more inclusive is unfounded. Because if you don't try to make things better or say, you know what, I'm going to take a step back and see how this plays out, see how this will make my community better. Because a child learning about Black folks or queer folks in the community, it's going to make that classroom more safe and more inclusive and pique curiosity for folks to go outside of their comfort zone and to fight back the fear and say, you know what, I'm going to be more intentional about being involved in helping those across the spectrum, right? And so I think that's it too. And I think something else is you have to just be afraid of, not be afraid of having uncomfortable conversations. I think it's Frederick Douglass who said, without struggle, there's no progress. So in any of the good policies that have come into fruition or any of the things that we're doing to fight back against extremism, we have to be uncomfortable. It takes uncomfortable conversations. It takes us getting out of our comfort zone to make sure that we move, in the words of Dr. King, towards the arc of justice. And it's going to take folks from all walks of life to get us there. And I would be remiss if I'd say, I don't have privilege myself. Because I am a Black woman, it does not make me downtrodden. I am very proud. I am very excellent. I've been the first of many in many ways. And I want to continue that legacy in celebrating Black history, but not hiding some of the realities that have been violent and that have been wrought with death and repression of my people and so many others. And so I would say, it's been a privilege for me to study Africana studies and history and theater in college. I'm sure most people are like, well, why didn't you study engineering or something? I'm like, I don't like math. Or to work in an organization, to be an organizer. And so not only do I know that, some of my identities have been targeted and repressed, many of my identities being a mother, being an organizer, being a historian is a privilege. And that's why I like being in spaces like this to share the information with folks, no matter where they are in the journey.
I love that. And I want to follow up, at least like I have one more question for you, because I would love for you to tell us, who should we know about that we probably have never heard of? And as many as you want to share. I'm like, I am in learning mode.
Okay, cool. Well, there are a number of people, organizations, all the things, but I'll start first is that, as a part of my work being an activist and being in progressive spaces, some of this work can be really heavy sometimes. And so there's an author, Alex L., and she has How We Heal. Actually, she is based in the DC area, and this is not her first book, but she talks about healing as a form of resistance as well. The theme of this year's Black History Month is Black resistance. And so I would say centering your healing is an act of resistance in making the world more equitable, because I think that that's some of the things that need to happen, is that folks need to come together, have hard conversations, and say, how can we heal and move forward with this? I'd also say one of the reasons why I even got into the work and history in general is because the arts are such a reflection of what I would call the zeitgeist or spirit of the times. And so there's a book by Chantrell P. Lewis called Dandelion, and looks at fashion and art movements across the African diaspora. And it's such a colorful text and beautiful coffee table book. And then I think so broadly about the present and future, and a book by Kimberly Drew and Jenna Wortham, Black Futures, came out, I believe, last year, and it's basically an encyclopedia about all things Black culture, but also reimagining what Black culture is, and knowing that like Black excellence is futuristic. We live in the present, we've been excellent in the past, but our futures are so bright. And so this text is really based in just celebrating Black folks, but also concepts like Afrofuturism, if you're familiar with Octavia Butler's work. So that's what I would say. And then many of the culinary traditions of America are based on Black food or soul food in some places. Folks call it different things in other places. And as someone who loves soul food from all cultures, soul food is not just a Black thing. Soul food can be found in many cultures. Black Food by Bryant Terry is another good one. And then something that really I've been learning more about as I think about the socioeconomic implications of many of these policies is The Whiteness of Wealth. Is a book by Dorothy A. Brown of how the tax system impoverishes Black Americans and how we can fix it. And so many of the folks that I follow are on the cutting edge of arts, culture, the economy, politics in general. And I also would be remiss if I didn't mention that even today, in Pennsylvania's legislature, they have the first Black woman as Speaker of the House, and her name is Representative Joanna McClinton, Pennsylvania's first Black woman in the state house, announced today. In Virginia, one of our first states, last week, Jennifer McClellan became the first Black Congresswoman elect from Virginia. And we know Virginia's had a long standing tradition of so many things, but just the fact that the first Black woman just made it to Congress from that state is astounding in 2023. But regardless of the first, we have to keep on going, educating folks about them, and really ideating and thinking about how we can have a better today and future for generations to come. And so I am grateful that I'm familiar with these folks. And then I would be also remiss if I didn't mention that our Banned Book Club on March 15th at Red Wine and Blue will be celebrating the work of the illustrious ancestor Toni Morrison. And so I'd encourage folks to join us on March 15th in a reading of that book. You don't have to have read the full book. You'll get plenty of juicy nuggets just attending and being in conversation with a professor who's renowned for his work on studying Dr. Morris's work from Ithaca College based in New York. And so those are a few that I could come up with a whole bunch.
Oh, I love it. And I was going to
Yeah.
ask you, please send me every book that you just showed.
Oh,
Send it
yeah.
to me and I'll put it in the comments.
Oh, good. Awesome.
Because I haven't heard of any of those. And
Yeah.
I am like, oh my gosh, I want to know. I want to know.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And then there are a number of Black artists. Behind me, I have art from Crown magazine, the poster with the woman. Crown magazine celebrates Black women's hair. And it's called Crown magazine because it is named after the Crown Act on making sure that, you know, folks aren't discriminated because of their hairstyles in the workplace or anywhere. And so Crown Mag, which is based, I want to say, in Texas and New York. And then I also have art by Keisha Bruce, who's a Florida-based Black woman artist, and then also Krista David, who is as well. And so I'll definitely share. And there's so many resources on the internet. There are other organizations that study the history of Black women in general. And I also wanted to share a quote here, someone who's a proud Black woman. It's an excerpt from the Combahee River Collective that was a Black feminist and womanist LGBTQI collective started in Boston back in the 80s. And this is something that's really grounded me in my work as a feminist and womanist. And it says, the quote says, "If Black women were free, it would mean that everyone else would have to be free, since our freedom would necessitate the destruction of all systems of oppression." And so that excerpt from the Combahee River Collective has definitely guided me as a historian and someone who's very much committed to fighting for the rights of Black folks, women, birthing people, and anybody who encounters injustice.
Incredible.
Oh my gosh. I know. Incredible. And just one more question, I promise. And then Joe, if you have any more, because I know we're getting close to an hour. Because we talked about, you know, this, the whole theme here is that Black history is a year long. So is there one or two really good resources that we can go to make sure we're learning Black history, not just in February, but we're learning about it all year long?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the 1619 project,
Yes.
I mean, honestly, I have not gotten through the full text yet because it is quite deep, and I like to read a little, then process, because you can't just kind of speed read through this. But not only the book, the 6-part documentary on Hulu is streaming right now, and it's chock full of information. Even on Netflix, there was a documentary series that's 4 parts called High on the Hog that came out a couple years ago that talks about Black history from Africa through present day. A lot of it does have a lot to do with food traditions, but also history in general. I would suggest that. And I would also say tune into or give to other Black organizations. There's so many Black organizations doing amazing work. I say not only give to them, sign up for a recurring contribution. Sign the petitions to fight back against the anti-woke bills. We actually have one on our website to send Governor DeSantis a message that he's got to stop this "don't say Black" stuff, because Black folks aren't going anywhere, and to keep our history hidden from students is an atrocity, quite frankly. And then I think that folks just have to be curious, have the conversations. I know some folks are like, well, Ray, I may not have the language. You're like an activist. You have the language around, you know, pronouns and how people like to be referred to, but just ask someone, being curious and being thoughtful about saying, hey, I want to learn more about your community. I want to know more about your learned experience. First and foremost, maybe it's a mom at soccer practice. Maybe it's someone that your neighbor, but just having the conversation saying, I am curious, I want to know more, and I want to be a better ally, advocate, or even co-conspirator on some levels. And so having the conversations with folks that don't look like us, that have different experiences. Generally, people like talking about themselves. And so usually, if it's someone who's in your network, more often than not, they'll be open to having the conversation, even if it's hard. But that's how we move towards progress and justice, is by having the hard conversations and investing in the movements and organizations and businesses that have been disenfranchised or don't have as many resources or that are marginalized systemically.
Yeah. I just think thank you so much. This is an amazing conversation. We could probably have this for like an entire week, but I just think that's one of those things that people have to realize, is that this impacts all of us, that we'll all benefit from this. All of our children, society as a whole, will only benefit from these kinds of conversations and from acknowledging our true and accurate past, so that we can move towards a more, inclusive future. So I'm so glad, first of all, to have met you. You're amazing and inspiration. And I'm just so glad to be able to have these conversations. And I love the idea of curiosity, because I, for one, I'm like so obsessed with the soul food thing now that I'm like, I need to go and read that book. But I just I'm personally grateful that we were able to have this conversation, and so glad to have met you. And thank you.
Well, thank you all. And we're on the precipice of International Women's History Month too, just starting tomorrow. And so suffice it to say, women's history, Black history should be 24/7, 365. And so while we do celebrate in February, and I'm very grateful that we've, as a nation, been celebrating Black History Month since 1976, it's incumbent upon us to celebrate us all the time. And so I know one thing, I'm gonna be Black 365. And so I'm invested in sharing this information about my experience and the history of my communities I'm a part of any day. So I'm glad to come back whenever you'll have me.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. And we'll get all the information that Ray mentioned, and we'll put those in the comments so people can have access to that. Ray, Joe, thank you. This is just like such a highlight of this work, just being able to talk to like amazing women and have these conversations. And just to mention Red Wine and Blue, you can visit our website, redwine.blue. And like Ray mentioned, there's something you can sign to tell Governor DeSantis that we're not standing for that. We don't want Florida to be where woke goes to die.
Right.
We're not. So ridiculous. And then also definitely follow us on social media, because we'll keep you inspired to keep going, and we'll keep you in the know, and we'll just keep talking, just keep talking. So thanks everybody. Have a great afternoon. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.